Please, help me. This is my daughter, Lila. She's been missing for 3 days. Any clue? I just want to find her." People's reactions were almost automatic. Some shook their heads quickly, not even slowing down. Others avoided eye contact, pretending they hadn't heard her. Carolyn, the mother, stayed there, each rejection tightening the pain in her chest. But she didn't give up. Her love for her daughter pushed her forward, even when it felt like the entire world had decided to ignore her suffering. That's when her eyes fixed on a sophisticated woman walking just a few steps ahead. Her hair was tied in a perfect bun, her gleaming shoes clicked against the pavement, and her leather bag looked far too expensive for this neighborhood. Carolyn rushed toward her, clutching the photo as if it were her last shred of hope. "Please. Look. This is my daughter. She's only 8 years old. I need help." The woman, June, paused for a brief second. Her cold eyes scanned Carolyn's face before settling on the photo. But her expression remained frozen, like stone. "I'm sorry. I can't help." Without hesitation, she walked away. Carolyn stood there, stunned, as June's firm footsteps echoed and faded into the crowd. She pressed the photo to her chest, trying to hold back her tears. How could someone ignore a mother's despair? What June didn't realize was that her seemingly simple decision, to turn her back and walk away, would set off events that would change both their lives forever. As June's steady footsteps echoed along the sidewalk, she tried to shake off the image of that desperate woman. Something about the way Carolyn's trembling fingers held the photo unsettled her for a moment. But, as always, she forced herself not to dwell on it. "I can't get involved," she repeated to herself, a mantra she had lived by for years. June was known for her determination and success. Working at a prestigious law firm, she had the kind of life people admired. Always polished, punctual, and seemingly in control of everything. But no one knew about the past she refused to revisit. As a child, June grew up in a household marked by neglect. Her father left when she was only 5, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Their relationship was strained. June's mother, overwhelmed by responsibilities, was cold and distant, unable to show affection. To June, asking for help or showing weakness felt like failure. "If you don't do it yourself, no one else will," her mother always said. The emotional silence of that home shaped who June became. As a teenager, she vowed to never rely on anyone. By 18, she left home, cutting nearly all ties with her family. Since then, she had built her life alone, always keeping a safe distance from anything that required vulnerability. But something about that mother on the sidewalk seemed to echo the pain June had buried long ago. The desperation in Carolyn's eyes reminded her of those silent moments when she herself had begged, inwardly, for the care she never received. When June got to her apartment, she dropped her bag on the couch and headed straight to the kitchen to make coffee. While the water boiled, she turned on the TV to the local news. She wasn't paying much attention until a headline caught her eye. "Missing child in suburban neighborhood, search continues." The image of Lila, the girl from Carolyn's photo, filled the screen. June froze for a moment, a knot tightening in her chest. She quickly turned off the TV, but the child's face lingered in her mind. Something about it gnawed at her in a way she couldn't ignore. And for the first time in years, June felt a crack in her emotional armor. The night fell, but June could hardly sleep. The image of the little girl on the news and Carolyn's desperate gaze lingered in her mind. Tossing and turning in bed, she tried, unsuccessfully, to push away the unease gnawing at her. "This has nothing to do with me. I don't know that woman, and I don't know that child," she muttered to herself. But the words felt hollow, like an excuse even she didn't believe. The next morning, June followed her usual routine. She dressed impeccably, fixed her hair with almost surgical precision, and rushed out of the house. The day promised to be busy at the office, with tight deadlines and important meetings. She knew how to bury herself in work to silence any internal discomfort. It had always worked before. But something felt different that day. Passing a cafe on her way to the office, she saw a mother helping her son balance on a bicycle. The boy's laughter echoed down the street, and June felt a sharp pang in her chest. Trying to shake off the thought, she quickened her pace. "You're being ridiculous. This isn't your problem." Hours later, as she reviewed a contract in her office, a notification popped up on her phone. It was a group message from an old colleague, sharing the same headline from the news: "Missing girl, Day 4, police seek community help." Attached to the message was Lila's photo again. That familiar lump returned to June's throat. She set her phone down and rubbed her eyes, frustrated with herself. "Why is this affecting me so much?" she whispered into the silence. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the memory of Carolyn clutching that photo seemed glued to her mind. The mother's desperation, the anguish in her eyes. June realized there was something painfully familiar in that expression. She had seen that look before. In the mirror. Years ago, when she was just a teenager grappling alone with abandonment and the gut-wrenching feeling that no one cared. Suddenly, guilt started to creep in. Had she been too insensitive? Carolyn wasn't asking for much. She just wanted someone to listen, to validate her pain, even if they couldn't solve her problem. But June had turned her back. Just like so many people had done to her. The afternoon passed in a blur. June couldn't focus, and for the first time in years, she considered leaving work early. She grabbed her phone, hesitated, and quickly searched for any updates about Carolyn or Lila. Nothing new. Just the same story, a mother desperately searching for her daughter. On her way home, June noticed a poster stuck to a lamppost in the distance. It was Lila's photo, with a contact number underneath. The poster was crumpled, barely hanging on, and seemed utterly ignored. June stopped, staring at the image longer than she cared to admit. Deep down, she knew she couldn't keep ignoring this. But the fear of getting involved felt like an unscalable wall. She took 2 steps away from the lamppost, then froze. What would happen if she helped? Would it even make a difference? And what if it didn't? Closing her eyes, she wrestled with the indecision screaming inside her. The next day dawned gray, the sky heavy with clouds. June tried to stick to her routine, but her mind remained trapped on the image of Carolyn standing on the sidewalk, clutching that photo with an almost superhuman strength. During her lunch break, June decided to take a quick walk, hoping it would clear her head. As she passed through a park, something made her stop abruptly. Sitting on a bench, shoulders hunched and eyes vacant, was Carolyn. She looked even more defeated than the day before. Her simple clothes were wrinkled, and the dark circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. In her lap was the same photo of her daughter, now with frayed edges. Carolyn clutched a coffee cup that was probably cold, seemingly unaware of her surroundings. June froze. For a moment, she considered walking away again, pretending she hadn't seen her. But something inside her wouldn't let her. Before she could convince herself otherwise, she took a few hesitant steps toward Carolyn. "Hi." Carolyn looked up, startled. Her eyes took a moment to recognize June, and when they did, her face hardened. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice tinged with hurt. June felt the weight of the question. She knew she had failed before, but something about Carolyn's posture kept her rooted there, even though part of her wanted to run away. I saw your daughter on TV. Her story." Carolyn pressed the photo against her chest like a shield. "And how does that help me? You saw me. You ignored me. How do you think that made me feel?" June took a deep breath. She had never been good at opening up, but something about this moment pushed her out of her comfort zone. "I know what it feels like, to be alone. To feel like no one cares. And I think yesterday, I made you feel that way." Her words came out shakier than she had expected. Carolyn stayed silent, but her eyes began to glisten with tears she was fighting to hold back. "She's only 8 years old," Carolyn finally said, her voice breaking. "She hates sleeping without the light on. She always cries when there's thunder. I don't even know where she is right now." June felt a lump in her throat. For the first time, she truly grasped the weight of what Carolyn was enduring. "Let me help," she said, almost without thinking. Carolyn stared at her in disbelief. "Why? Why now?" June hesitated but finally answered. "Because ignoring you was the worst thing I've ever done." June wasn't sure where to begin. Her promise to help Carolyn was a step she hadn't planned, but she knew there was no turning back. The weight of guilt and the shattered look in Carolyn's eyes were all she needed to move forward, even without knowing how. That afternoon, sitting side by side in a modest cafe near the park, Carolyn recounted the details of Lila's disappearance. As she spoke, June jotted down everything in a notebook she had hastily bought. Every word carried pain. "She was playing in the backyard. I got distracted, scrolling through my phone. It only took seconds. When I looked up, she was gone." Carolyn's voice quivered, and she brought her hand to her face, trying to hide her tears. June remained silent, allowing her to pour her heart out. "I can't stop thinking. If only I'd been paying attention. If only I had." "It wasn't your fault," June interjected for the first time. Her voice was firm, though she avoided meeting Carolyn's eyes. She knew all too well what it was like to carry guilt for things beyond one's control. As they talked, June felt something stir within her. Carolyn's words were unearthing memories she had long buried. Disjointed images flashed through her mind, herself as a child, sitting on the doorstep, waiting for a father who never came back. The abandonment she had turned into an emotional fortress now felt like a raw, open wound. After dropping Carolyn off at home, June returned to her apartment. Exhausted, she sank into her couch, the dim light of a lamp casting a faint glow across the room. Reaching into a drawer, she pulled out an old photograph. It was from her childhood, her and her mother. "If only I'd been paying attention." Carolyn's words echoed in her mind. She remembered all the times she tried to get her mother's attention, pleading for affection that never came. Suddenly, it hit her why Carolyn's plight had struck such a deep chord. It wasn't just about helping someone in need. It was about confronting parts of herself she had ignored for too long. The next day, June took action. She began canvassing Carolyn's neighborhood, knocking on doors with Lila's photo in hand. Some people were willing to help, while others were too busy or indifferent. But June persisted. That evening, when she returned home, she found Carolyn sitting on her doorstep, clutching the same photo of her daughter. Carolyn looked up, her weary eyes locking onto June's. "Thank you for not giving up." June felt a lump rise in her throat. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just helping Carolyn. In a way, she was helping herself. The days dragged on, a blend of hope and despair. Carolyn and June formed an unlikely but powerful alliance. Carolyn was driven by her desperate need to find her daughter, while June wrestled with her own demons, determined to make a difference. One morning, June had an idea: visit a plaza near the neighborhood where Lila was last seen. It was a busy place, teeming with street vendors and passers-by who might have noticed something. Carolyn, hesitant but resolute, accompanied her, clutching the photo of Lila as always. The scene at the plaza was chaotic. Children played, bicycles zipped by, and the shouts of vendors filled the air. June began approaching people, one by one, showing the photo and asking questions. "Have you seen this girl?" Most people shook their heads, muttering apologies before walking away. Others didn't even stop to listen. Carolyn stood quietly, fighting back tears. The sense of racing against time was overwhelming. Finally, an elderly ice cream vendor, wearing a worn-out hat, seemed to take an interest. He stared at the photo for a few moments, his brow furrowed as if trying to recall something. "I think I've seen this girl before." His words made Carolyn's heart race. "Where? When?" she asked, her voice trembling with urgency. The man pointed toward a side street. "It was over there, a couple of days ago. She was with a man. She looked nervous, but I don't know if he was her father or someone else." Carolyn nearly collapsed. It was the first concrete lead in days. June, her expression resolute, steadied Carolyn with a firm grip on her arm. "Let's go," she said, her tone carrying a determination that surprised even herself. The two followed the direction the vendor had pointed. The street was narrow and dimly lit, lined with old, stained buildings and shattered windows. It felt like a place forgotten by time, where no one asked questions. As they walked, June couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Every step felt heavier, every shadow along the street seemed alive. Carolyn clutched the photo tightly to her chest, murmuring quiet prayers. At the end of the street, they spotted a small convenience store. Carolyn hesitated. What if he's here? What if, she couldn't finish the thought. "We won't know unless we try," June said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. The two entered the store. The air was stuffy, and the only sound came from an old TV broadcasting a soccer match. The cashier, a man with a guarded expression, glanced up as they walked in. June stepped forward and held up the photo of Lila. "Have you seen this girl?" The man stared at the photo for a moment, and to their surprise, his eyes hardened. He quickly looked away and mumbled. "I haven't seen anything." But something about his reaction made June suspicious. "Are you sure?" she pressed, stepping closer. The man opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, a loud noise came from the back of the store, something falling. Everyone froze. Carolyn gripped June's arm tightly, her breath hitching. The sound from the back of the store echoed in the tense silence of the room. Carolyn clung to June's arm with such force that it seemed like she was holding on just to keep herself upright. The cashier's eyes darted nervously, betraying the mistake he'd made by reacting. June, her heart pounding, took a step forward, doing her best to appear more confident than she felt. "What was that? Is someone back there?" she asked, her voice steady. The man hesitated, his gaze fixed on the counter as though avoiding her question. "It's just a cat. There's no one back there." But June didn't believe him. She recognized fear when she saw it, and this man was clearly uncomfortable. Before she could press further, Carolyn, overwhelmed with anxiety, stepped forward. "Is my daughter back there? Please, if you know anything, tell me." Her voice cracked, laden with desperation. The cashier stepped back, visibly shaken by her plea. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could say anything, another noise came from the back. This time, it was louder, something had fallen to the ground. June glanced at Carolyn, then back at the door leading to the store's rear. Without a word, she started walking toward it. "Wait! You can't go back there!" The cashier shouted, but it was too late. June pushed the door open, revealing a narrow, poorly lit hallway. The air was heavy, filled with the damp smell of mildew. Carolyn hesitated at the entrance but followed June, clutching Lila's photo in one hand and gripping the railing with the other. At the end of the hallway, they reached a small room where a figure emerged from the shadows. A man sat on a bench, and beside him was a young girl clutching a teddy bear. It was Lila. "Lila!" Carolyn cried out, rushing toward her daughter. The man stood abruptly, but June, without hesitation, stepped between him and Carolyn. "Don't you dare touch her." Her eyes locked on his, her stance firm and radiating a courage she didn't even know she possessed. The man froze, clearly taken aback by June's resolve. At that moment, the cashier appeared in the doorway, muttering nervously. I didn't know he had her. I swear. He said he was leaving today. The tension was broken by the sound of quick footsteps down the hall. Two police officers, alerted by a witness who had seen Carolyn and June enter the store, burst in with their weapons drawn. The man offered no resistance as they subdued him. Carolyn dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around Lila with every ounce of strength she had. I thought I'd never see you again, she sobbed, tears streaming down her face as Lila clung to her, crying as well. June stood a few steps away, a mix of relief and emotion coursing through her. Her eyes welled with tears, but she quickly turned away, trying to compose herself. Later, at the police station, Carolyn gave her statement while June sat outside, lost in thought. When Carolyn emerged, holding Lila's hand, she stopped in front of June. I don't know how to thank you. You saved my daughter. June shook her head, a small smile finally breaking through her guarded expression. You saved me, too. Carolyn tilted her head in confusion but didn't press further. The two shared a look that spoke volumes, requiring no further explanation. As Carolyn and Lila walked away, June stayed seated for a moment. For the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the walls she had spent a lifetime building. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing. In the days following Lila's rescue, the impact of that moment rippled through both Carolyn and June's lives. Carolyn returned home with her daughter, working to rebuild a sense of normalcy, though it felt fragile and hard-won. For June, however, the experience brought a wave of unexpected introspection. She knew deep down that her decision to help Carolyn wasn't solely driven by guilt. There was something deeper, a need to confront the emptiness she had carried since childhood. By helping Carolyn, she had unknowingly reached a part of herself she had ignored for years. One evening, while lost in thought, her phone rang. Carolyn's voice came through, soft yet filled with an unmistakable gratitude. I just wanted to say thank you again. Lila's here with me, and she insists on calling you our hero. June smiled, a rare, genuine smile, but took a moment before replying. I just did what anyone should do. No, June. You did what many wouldn't have the courage to do. After the call ended, June sat with the phone in her hand, Carolyn's words echoing in her mind. She knew they were true. The decision she had made that day in the park had changed everything, not just for Carolyn, but for herself as well. Months passed, and while their lives diverged, the bond between Carolyn and June remained. Carolyn, now more attentive to the little things, treasured every moment with Lila, whether it was hearing her laughter or holding her hand on the way to school. June, on the other hand, felt a spark awaken within her. Though she still struggled with vulnerability, she began to open small spaces in her life for connection. One Sunday afternoon, while browsing books at a neighborhood store, June heard a familiar voice behind her. I knew I'd find you in a place like this. Turning around, she was surprised to see Carolyn. Beside her, Lila held a children's book, smiling shyly. How are you? June asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and concern. We're doing great. Lila's much better now. Carolyn lowered her voice as though sharing a secret. And part of that is thanks to you. June offered a small smile but didn't reply. She was never good at accepting praise, especially when she still felt there was so much to improve within herself. Mommy talks about you all the time, Lila said quietly, her voice filled with admiration. Carolyn gently stroked her daughter's hair, a gesture full of affection. Would you like to grab some coffee with us? June hesitated, but to her own surprise, she agreed. They spent the next hour at a nearby cafe, talking and laughing in a way that felt unexpectedly natural. Carolyn shared stories about Lila's new school and their journey back to normalcy, while June opened up about fragments of her own life, something she rarely did. As they said their goodbyes, Carolyn handed June an envelope. I never got the chance to give you this. Inside was a small photo of Lila, along with a handwritten note, thank you for saving us, not just that day, but forever. June held the envelope, watching Carolyn and Lila walk away. For the first time in years, she felt the missing pieces of her life beginning to fall into place. A few days after the unexpected encounter at the bookstore, June decided to do something she had been avoiding for years. She picked up the phone, hesitated for a moment, but finally dialed her mother's number. The phone rang several times before a familiar, raspy voice answered. "June." She took a few seconds before replying. It had been nearly a decade since she last spoke to her mother, and now the words felt impossibly heavy. "It's me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The silence that followed was thick with everything left unsaid, but this time, June decided she wouldn't let fear or pride take over. "I just wanted to know how you're doing." The conversation was short, filled with pauses and hesitations, but for June, it was enough. There was no magical reconciliation, no instant healing, but there was something she hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. As the day turned to night, June felt something shift within her. She began to realize that life wasn't just about surviving, it was about those small moments when we choose to connect, despite the wounds we carry. That night, as she closed her eyes, June knew there was still a long road ahead. But for the first time, she was ready to face it. Because in the end, it's the choices we make, even the smallest ones, that shape the kind of person we want to be. And what about you? Have you ever had a moment in your life when helping someone changed everything, including yourself? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to read and respond. Stay tuned for another heartwarming story.